The first sound was not silence but wind, restless and unyielding, moving across a world that was still deciding whether to be habitable. Ice groaned at the poles, mountains strained upward with tectonic hunger, and oceans heaved as if remembering ancient tempests. Somewhere on that unsettled earth, small bands of humans kindled fire, their sparks pushing against the infinite night. They did not yet know that they were heirs to forgotten epochs and guardians of mysteries older than any language they could shape. They only knew hunger, survival, and the unexplainable vastness above them. Yet in those early footsteps, the entire arc of human destiny trembled, an unfinished story written in bone, stone, and silence. If you've ever felt the pull of forgotten time, if you've ever wondered about the eras hidden beneath ice, sand, and myth, you're in the right place. This channel exists to walk with you into Earth's shadowed corridors of memory. So, if this journey stirs you, lend your support, like, share, and subscribe, because together we are not simply remembering, but reawakening what the Earth itself refuses to forget. The first flame that ever pushed back the dark was not an accident in the eyes of those who gathered around it. To us, millennia later, it appears as the result of friction, sparks coaxed from stone, or embers carried from a lightning strike. But for them, that sudden bloom of fire in a world of predators and shadows was nothing less than a miracle, something alive, something that breathed, something that could both consume and protect. Imagine the Paleolithic night, silence broken by the call of unseen beasts, the wind threading through tall grasses, the river muttering against its stones. Into this fearful immensity came light. It cracked, it hissed, it sent shadows fleeing across cavern walls. It was not simply survival, it was revelation. For the first time, humankind held a fragment of the sun in their hands. Fire was a threshold. It changed what could be eaten, turning roots and meats from bitter or poisonous into nourishment. It hardened the tips of spears, extended the day beyond the setting of the sun, and frightened away creatures that once ruled the darkness. But more than that, it created a center. Around the circle of flame, people began to gather. In its glow they spoke, they sang, they remembered. The fire did not only give warmth to their bodies, but offered a hearth for memory itself. Perhaps it was in those long nights, beneath a sky filled with stars, that the first true stories were spoken aloud. The story of a successful hunt, the warning of a predator's path, the whispered dream of a spirit seen in sleep. All were threads woven into the fire's presence. For without fire, those voices would have been scattered into the cold. The earth itself at this time was still raw, still unstable. The late Pleistocene world was vast and unforgiving, its landscapes carved by advancing and retreating glaciers, its rivers swollen with meltwater. Giant mammals, the mammoth, the woolly rhinoceros, the cave lion, moved across those lands with dominion, and humans, fragile in comparison, learned to survive by watching, imitating, and adapting. A broken branch might reveal the passage of prey. The smell of damp earth might signal the presence of fresh water. The cry of birds could warn of danger. But fire was different. It was not borrowed from the world, but created, captured, controlled. In taming flame, humans stepped outside the boundaries of mere reaction. They became shapers, not just survivors. Picture a small band gathered at dusk, the air sharp with the promise of frost. The fire at their feet glows low, built carefully from tinder and dry wood scavenged earlier in the day. Around it sit figures cloaked in furs, their faces lit by amber flickers. A child stares at the embers as if seeing something sacred, while an elder gestures toward the horizon, speaking of a hunt long past. The smoke rises, curling into the starlit sky, and there is a sense that the fire connects earth and heaven, visible both to those who sit in its glow and perhaps to whatever watches from above. In that moment, humanity becomes more than flesh. It becomes mind, memory, and meaning. Archaeologists tell us that traces of fire stretch back hundreds of thousands of years, with hearths found in caves and ancient campsites across Africa, Europe, and Asia. Blackened stones, layers of ash, and charred bones whisper of evenings long extinguished. But no artifact can quite capture what it meant to them. The relief when predators kept their distance, the warmth against a bitter wind, the taste of roasted meat transforming hunger into strength. Nor can evidence capture the way the fire seemed alive, a being to be respected, fed with wood, shielded from rain, coaxed back to life when it faltered. It was companion as much as tool. It is here, in the glow of these first hearths, that one of humanity's deepest transformations occurred. For fire did not simply make survival easier, it made reflection possible. The flame stretched the hours of the day, offering time not consumed by toil. In that surplus of light, people could turn inward or outward, imagining spirits in the shadows, gods in the stars, futures not yet lived. The capacity for myth may well have been born at the edge of a fire. With each spark that leapt upward, so too leapt the imagination of humankind. Yet fire was never without danger. It could slip its boundaries, racing into forests, devouring shelters, turning safety into peril. It demanded respect. Those who carried it from one camp to the next were entrusted with more than a practical task. They were bearers of continuity, guardians of light. One can imagine the anxiety if embers died before dawn, leaving the group in cold darkness. The quest to reignite flame must have felt like bargaining with the elements themselves. In later ages, myths would remember fire as a divine theft, a gift stolen from the gods. Perhaps those myths are echoes of this deep anxiety, that fire was never truly ours, only borrowed, and could be taken back. The fire's circle also reshaped human bonds. Around its warmth, strangers became kin, hunters became storytellers, children became apprentices. The flickering light carved faces out of darkness, allowing emotions to be seen, shared, and remembered. Laughter sounded different in its glow, as did grief. The communal meal, the telling of journeys, the silent staring into flames, these were acts that transformed mere existence into culture. Without fire, the night would scatter humans into isolated fear. With it, the night became a shared experience, a theater where imagination played across tongues and shadows. If we could step back into that Paleolithic night, we might notice how the fire reflected in eyes, how it cast moving patterns against cave walls, how sparks rose and fell like tiny stars. We might feel the ground trembling faintly with the distant tread of mammoths, hear the low growl of a lion prowling beyond the perimeter of light, sense the enormity of a world not yet subdued. And at the heart of it all would be this circle of warmth, fragile yet defiant, proclaiming that humanity had begun to claim its place. That fire did not just change the world outside, it altered the landscape within. Over generations, the mastery of fire spread across continents. In the cold steppes of Eurasia, it meant survival against freezing winds. In the forests of Africa, it cleared pathways and encouraged new growth. In caves deep underground, it revealed paintings, bison, horses, handprints, lit by torchlight, as if fire itself became the partner of art. The flickering light gave motion to painted animals, making them appear alive, charging across walls with spectral movement. Perhaps it was here, in that collaboration between flame and pigment, that the human sense of magic and ritual found its first true home. Fire also carried humanity forward into new frontiers of thought. To cook food was to alter nature, to transform it into something greater than what it was. To kindle flame was to challenge the rhythm of night and day, stretching perception of time. To sit by the hearth was to imagine continuity, to think not only of now, but of tomorrow, of seasons yet to come, of descendants who would inherit the same flame. The hearth became an axis around which the human mind revolved, drawing connections between past, present, and future. And yet, fire always contained a paradox. It was fragile, easily extinguished by rain or wind, and yet it could grow boundless, raging across landscapes with terrifying force. It was both creation and destruction, guardian and threat. To live with fire was to live with contradiction, to balance reverence with utility. Perhaps this is why so many cultures later personified fire as a god or spirit, a being whose favor must be courted, whose wrath must be feared. In its unpredictability, fire mirrored life itself. As the Pleistocene gave way to the Holocene, as ice retreated and forests thickened, the role of fire deepened. It was no longer only a circle of survival, but a tool for shaping landscapes, clearing fields, forging bonds, hardening clay. Yet in its earliest moments, it remained above all a light against the night, a fragile miracle. Imagine again that first time when darkness seemed eternal, and then, suddenly, there was flame. It cracked and hissed, and shadows danced, and in that instant, humanity felt something stir, the sense that the world could be more than endured. It could be transformed. The fire burned low, embers glowing, sparks rising into the darkness like lost stars. Around it, the people drifted toward sleep, trusting that its warmth would hold the predators at bay. Above them, the sky stretched unbroken, vast with mystery, and in the glow of that fragile circle, humankind began to dream, not only of tomorrow's hunt, but of things beyond sight, beyond survival, beyond the night itself. When dawn broke after a night at the fire's edge, the world that greeted those first wanderers was not gentle. It was carved and scarred, a landscape shaped by ice and upheaval, where every step demanded resilience. The ground beneath their feet was young in geological terms, restless with memory. Mountains thrust upward from the crust in jagged defiance, valleys lay gouged by glaciers, and rivers roared with the force of meltwater rushing from far-off ice sheets. The land itself was both adversary and companion, a body of bones and veins that would feed, shelter, and test those who moved across it. To walk across that terrain was to move within the architecture of deep time. Great boulders lay scattered like the remnants of Titans' battles, deposited by retreating glaciers as if casually dropped from the hands of giants. Plains stretched endlessly, their grasses rippling like oceans, concealing herds of beasts that dwarfed humans in size and power. The mammoth, the aurochs, the bison, they were the living embodiments of the land's raw abundance. Yet the same earth could shift without warning, quaking beneath tectonic pressures, swallowing valleys in sudden floods, or choking skies with ash when volcanoes bled fire from the planet's core. To live upon such a world was to dwell at the mercy of forces far beyond human measure, and yet, gradually, to learn to listen to them. The earth spoke in patterns, and those who survived learned to read them. The curve of a valley told of water that could be found. The direction of prevailing winds revealed where shelter might be sought. The color of the soil suggested whether roots or tubers might grow nearby. Every stone, every ridge, every tree line carried information. A map written not in ink, but in terrain itself. Human feet traced those maps long before parchment existed, and in their journeys across savanna and tundra, desert and forest, they became the interpreters of Earth's shifting script. Glaciers were among the most powerful scribes of this landscape. In the north, walls of ice towered like mountains, grinding the land beneath them, leaving behind valleys so vast they appeared carved by gods. These frozen frontiers were both barrier and lure. At their margins, life thrived. Reindeer, muskoxen, and caribou grazed the tundra grasses, pursued by wolves and shadowed by human hunters. In the cold, survival demanded adaptation. Thicker furs, sturdier shelters, more ingenious tools. To master the cold was to master patience, to accept that life could be sustained not by abundance, but by careful calculation, by hoarding fat, by rationing firewood, by marking the migrations of animals with the precision of a calendar, long before calendars were written. Elsewhere, rivers shaped destiny. They were lifelines, carving paths through rock and soil, their waters carrying fish, their banks attracting game. Along rivers, early humans moved like shadows, following currents as they would later follow trade routes. The sound of water became a constant companion, guiding them from one territory to another. In floodplains, the annual rhythms of swelling and retreating waters taught lessons that would one day grow into agriculture, that the land could be renewed, that patience could yield plenty. To stand beside a river was to feel the earth's pulse, steady and ceaseless, a reminder that survival was not a solitary act, but a partnership with the forces of nature. The earth also provided sanctuaries, though never without cost. Caves beckoned as shelters from wind and predators, their entrances dark mouths in the stone. Within them, firelight revealed ancient artistry. Animals painted with ochre and charcoal, handprints pressed onto walls, spirals and symbols whose meanings are still debated. Were they records of hunts, expressions of belief, or attempts to speak with unseen worlds? Whatever their purpose, they were carved from the land itself, pigment and stone married into something enduring. Caves preserved not only bodies, but minds, archiving imagination in ways no open plain could. Yet caves were also perilous, cold, damp, filled with the possibility of collapse or ambush. They were the earth's ribs, enclosing both safety and danger. The great forests, too, played their part. In their shadows, early humans moved with caution, attuned to the crack of branches, the sudden silence of birds. Forests gave wood for fire, bark for shelter, berries for sustenance. But they also concealed predators, bears, panthers, serpents, lurking unseen until they struck. The forest was a teacher of attention, of listening with more than ears, of sensing the unseen. To navigate it was to practice vigilance, to respect the hidden, to understand that the earth withheld as much as it revealed. Deserts, by contrast, taught endurance. Under relentless suns, water became the most precious discovery, and the ability to remember where an oasis lay could mean the difference between life and death. The shifting sands erased trails, disoriented the traveler, forced them to rely on stars and instinct. And yet, deserts offered treasures, salt, stone, silence, that shaped cultures in ways no fertile valley could. In such places, survival was not abundance, but austerity, the refinement of need to its most essential form. What united all these landscapes was their power to shape the human body and spirit. The earth was not a passive stage upon which people acted. It was an active partner, sculpting muscle, sharpening senses, deepening endurance. Generations who moved across tundra developed resilience to cold. Those who hunted in forests honed silence and precision. Those who endured deserts became masters of patience and memory. The very diversity of the land ensured the diversity of humankind. To this day, the contours of terrain echo in the contours of culture. The bones of the land also carried mystery. Fossils of creatures long vanished were sometimes uncovered by rivers or storms. Fragments of tusks, enormous skulls, bones too large to belong to any living beast. What did those early humans make of such finds? Perhaps they became the origins of giants in myth, monsters in story, or spirits of the earth remembered around campfires. Even now, when we unearth mammoth bones or petrified forests, we feel the same awe, the sense that the land remembers more than it reveals, that beneath its surface lies a library written in stone. To live in such a world was to feel both small and immense. Small against mountains and storms, immense in the knowledge that the land could be learned, mapped, and slowly, carefully, adapted to human will. Every path beaten into soil, every tool shaped from stone, every fire lit against the cold was an act of dialogue with earth itself. Humanity did not yet dominate the land, but it had begun to converse with it, to trace its patterns, to weave itself into its vast and shifting story. In the end, the earth was the first teacher. It taught hunger and patience, danger and shelter, rhythm and unpredictability. It taught that survival was not conquest, but listening, not mastery, but respect. To walk across the bones of the land was to walk across history itself, a history still being written with every step. And as humans followed rivers, climbed mountains, endured deserts, and painted caves, they carried with them a growing awareness that the land was not merely backdrop, but destiny. It held the keys to future villages, cities, and civilizations, even as its bones whispered of forces that no fire, no tool, could ever fully tame. As the night fell once more, and fires were lit in scattered camps across continents, the land loomed silent and vast. Mountains kept their vigil. Rivers sang their ceaseless songs. Glaciers gleamed under the stars. Humanity's sparks of flame seemed fragile against such immensity, and yet, in their persistence, they marked a turning point. For in learning the land, in listening to its bones and veins, humans were not merely surviving, they were preparing for permanence, for settlement, for the dawn of villages that would bind them to the soil not just for a night, but for generations to come. When the nomadic footsteps that had echoed across plains and mountains began to slow, when the rhythm of rivers and seasons whispered of predictability, humanity stood at another threshold. The soil itself, once only crossed, became something to be turned, seeded, and trusted. No longer did survival mean only the hunt, the chase, the following of herds. It meant waiting, planting, returning. It meant believing that the ground beneath one's feet would yield life again and again. Out of this faith in permanence arose the first villages, fragile at first, but destined to reshape the human story. Imagine a cluster of dwellings rising from the earth, huts of mud brick and timber, smoke drifting from low hearths, tools resting where they had been used and not carried away. Here were hearths that were not merely temporary flames but centers of homes, flames tended day after day. Here was food not roasted in haste at the end of a hunt, but stored in clay jars, kept against the uncertainty of tomorrow. Around such centers, the air changed. Silence thickened, not with absence, but with presence. Children's laughter mingled with the pounding of grain. Dogs barked at strangers on the path, and within walls of reed or stone, life settled into cycles. The Neolithic Revolution was not a single moment, but a slow unfolding across thousands of years. From the Fertile Crescent to the valleys of the Indus, from the banks of the Nile to the river plains of China, scattered peoples began to bend their destinies to the rhythms of seed and harvest. The once wandering bands grew roots, both literal and symbolic. They raised walls not only against weather, but against uncertainty, and within those walls, they forged identities tied to place. To stay was to belong, to cultivate was to claim. The earth became not just the bones beneath them, but the womb that fed them. Yet permanence came at a cost. Where nomadic lives had known mobility as freedom, the anchored village discovered vulnerability. Crops could fail, droughts could wither fields, floods could swallow all. To remain in one place meant to risk all in the soil's whim. And with settled life came new dangers. Disease, born of crowding and waste, spread through close quarters where once space and distance had been protection. Rats and insects flourished in granaries. Plagues could linger where people gathered too densely, and wounds that once might heal under fresh air festered in confined huts. The very act of clustering together, of building permanence, drew both life and death closer. But permanence also birthed possibility. With surpluses of grain, time could be spared for crafts. Stone was shaped not only into spearheads, but into grinding stones, pottery, and ornaments. Clay tablets preserved marks, perhaps the earliest whispers of writing. Walls were painted, idols carved, and shrines erected, as if the gods themselves had taken up residence in the heart of villages. Rituals became tied not only to the hunt, but to the sowing and the harvest, to the cycles of sun and moon, to the fertility of field and woman alike. Festivals marked seasons, sacrifices pleaded with unseen powers for rain or sun. In the dawn of villages, the sacred and the mundane intertwined. The village also changed the way people understood kinship. Once bound only by blood and survival, communities began to organize themselves through roles: farmers, potters, hunters, weavers. Specialization was born, and with it, inequality. Some stored more, some had less, and with that imbalance came tension. Walls that had once marked safety also began to mark boundaries. A neighbor's field might provoke envy. A shortage might spark conflict. The permanence that gave comfort also fostered rivalry. Humanity, in rooting itself, had sown not only grain, but the seeds of power and possession. Still, the village was a crucible of memory. Here, generations overlapped in shared space. Stories passed from elder to child, not in fleeting encampments, but in homes that endured. Ancestral graves lay near the hearth, bones interred beneath floors, the dead never far from the living. Lineage became a river flowing visibly through time. The land held not only the crops of one season, but the echoes of those who had come before. To walk the village paths was to tread upon memory itself, compacted into earth, hardened by countless steps. Archaeological ruins of these first settlements, places like Çatalhöyük in Anatolia or Jericho near the Jordan River, still whisper of this transformation. Walls packed tightly together, streets winding like arteries, altars hidden in homes, skulls decorated and revered. These remnants are more than stone and clay. They are traces of humanity learning to inhabit time differently. The temporary had become the enduring. The campfire circle had widened into a community, and with it came not only warmth and survival, but complexity, ritual, and permanence. In the rhythm of daily tasks, grinding grain, weaving cloth, tending goats, there was a new cadence of life. Days lengthened into seasons, seasons into years, and suddenly, time itself stretched further than before. One could imagine not only tomorrow's hunt, but next year's harvest. Not only the lives of children, but of grandchildren. The future, once uncertain and fleeting, became something that could be prepared for, dreamed of, planned. In this stretch of imagination, civilization was born. And yet, with every wall raised, with every furrow carved, humanity also drew further from the wilderness that had once defined it. The intimacy with forests, rivers, and migrating herds gave way to a new intimacy with soil, with hearth, with enclosure. It was both gain and loss. The land was tamed, but perhaps something untamed within humanity was quieted too. Where once survival had demanded ceaseless motion, now there was waiting, laboring, hoping. The earth was still alive with unpredictability, but the human spirit began to adapt itself to permanence as much as to uncertainty. At night, fires still flickered, but they burned now within homes and courtyards, not on open plains. Around them gathered families who knew their boundaries, who knew the same faces day after day. The stars above remained as vast and unchanging as ever, but now they looked down on clusters of humanity that no longer drifted beneath them, but anchored themselves in one place. Perhaps, gazing upward, the villagers began to wonder not only at the stars, but at their own place beneath them, fixed, enduring, tied to soil in ways their ancestors could scarcely imagine. The dawn of villages was not the end of wandering. Nomads would still walk the deserts. Herders would still follow their flocks across steppes. Hunters would still trace the migrations of reindeer. But the seed of permanence had been planted, and from it would grow cities, kingdoms, empires. From it would grow hierarchies and wars, monuments and laws, temples and markets. All that humanity would later call civilization had its root in these humble villages, in the simple act of choosing to stay, to build, to plant, to trust. As one fire burned low in an early Neolithic village, embers glowing against the dark, a woman placed seeds into a small clay bowl beside her hearth. She did not know that her act, repeated countless times by countless hands, would ripple forward across millennia, shaping the fate of continents. For in that gesture lay the essence of what the village meant: continuity, trust, the belief that tomorrow would come and that humanity could shape it. And so, the village became the crucible of the human future, fragile yet enduring, vulnerable yet powerful. It was here that humanity learned not only how to survive but how to belong, to a place, to a people, to a time beyond one's own life. The dawn of villages was the dawn of destiny itself, the moment when humankind began to root itself into the bones of the land, not just as wanderers, but as dwellers, as dreamers, as makers of permanence. The stones we walk upon remember more than we do. Beneath the furrows of fields and the quiet foundations of villages lie older patterns, half erased, like palimpsests written over by centuries of survival and change. As humanity settled into the soil and raised its first walls, it also began to bury its past, not deliberately, but by the sheer weight of time. Yet every so often, fragments surface, a carved stone far older than the society that surrounds it, a submerged ruin glimpsed beneath the sea, a legend that insists of lands and peoples that came before. These are the cracks in history's mirror, reminders that our map of the past may be shattered, incomplete, distorted by loss and catastrophe. Consider Göbekli Tepe, rising out of the hills of Anatolia, where vast stone pillars, carved and aligned with precision, stand in deliberate circles, their surfaces marked with animals and symbols. Archaeologists date it to over 11,000 years ago, a time when, by conventional accounts, humans were still at the cusp of farming and simple village life. Yet here, massive stones were quarried, moved, and placed upright in arrangements that speak of cosmology, ritual, and organization. What does this say of our understanding? Were hunter-gatherers already capable of monumental architecture, or does Göbekli Tepe hint at knowledge that predated what we call civilization? The puzzle deepens when we consider sites now claimed by the sea. Along continental shelves, areas submerged when ice melted at the end of the Pleistocene, lie the ruins of what may have once been settlements. Off the coast of India, sonar surveys have revealed structures beneath the Gulf of Khambhat, patterns of stone that suggest roads, walls, and platforms long drowned. In Japan's Yonaguni, beneath turquoise waters, divers have traced steps and terraces cut into rock, some arguing for natural formation, others insisting on human design. If these are indeed man-made, they point to cultures erased not by slow erosion of time, but by sudden floods, perhaps during the cataclysms of the Younger Dryas, when ice melted, seas rose, and coastlines retreated. The Younger Dryas itself, a sudden cold snap that began around 12,800 years ago and lasted more than a millennium, carries with it whispers of catastrophe. Some researchers point to comet impacts, others to vast freshwater floods disrupting ocean currents. Whatever the cause, the effects were immense. Megafauna died out, climates shifted, and human societies were forced to adapt in ways that reshaped their futures. But what if, within those upheavals, entire cultures were lost? Societies with knowledge, stories, and structures now buried beneath silt and ice? Our maps show the present continents, but in those days, shorelines extended further, plains stretched where seas now lie. The cities of such peoples, if they existed, would now be drowned and hidden. Legends speak of such vanishings. Nearly every culture carries a flood story. The Sumerians told of Ziusudra, the Babylonians of Utnapishtim, the Hebrews of Noah. Across the ocean, the Maya told of floods that ended prior ages, while Polynesian chants remembered islands swallowed by waves. Are these coincidences born of universal fear or cultural memories of real events? When Plato wrote of Atlantis, describing a mighty island power sunk beneath the waves, was he repeating mere allegory or preserving a fragment of collective memory from a time before history began? Skeptics see metaphor, but myths are rarely born from nothing. They may be distorted retellings of calamities, echoes of civilizations too fragile to resist the sea. Even on land, anomalies whisper of lost chapters. Great megalithic stones in South America, cut and fitted with precision that modern masons marvel at, raise questions about how such work was achieved with tools presumed too primitive for the task. In Egypt, beneath the shadow of pyramids, weathering patterns on the Sphinx suggest it may be older than dynastic civilization itself, carved when rainfall was more abundant than in later desert centuries. These are clues, controversial and debated, but tantalizing in their implications, that what we call the beginning of civilization may only be one beginning, built upon forgotten ones. To admit this possibility is to embrace humility. Archaeology is not an exact map, but an unfolding process, its lines redrawn with every discovery. Each bone unearthed, each shard of pottery, each submerged terrace challenges us to reconsider what we know. The shattered map of time reminds us that certainty is fragile, and that silence in the record does not mean absence. human memory is short. Geological and cosmic memory is long. Between them lies a gulf where civilizations can vanish, leaving only puzzles. And yet, perhaps the truth is not that entire civilizations vanished without trace, but that fragments of them lived on, carried by survivors into the next age. Knowledge can persist, even when cities fall. Techniques of agriculture, rituals of worship, stories of origins may be the faint residues of older, unremembered peoples. The Neolithic villages that rose in Anatolia, Mesopotamia, and the Levant may have been inheritors not only of their own ingenuity, but of shadows passed down, ideas too important to let die, even when the hands that first shaped them had long turned to dust. For the people living then, none of this was abstraction. They would have seen waters rising, coastlines disappearing, animals migrating or vanishing, skies shifting with ash and storms. They would have felt the fear of loss, not in theory, but in reality, the collapse of order, the vanishing of sacred places, the silence where once there was song. Out of this trauma were born myths of endings and beginnings, stories to explain why the world had changed. And like all myths, they preserved not only fear, but memory. To walk among the ruins of ancient settlements today is to feel this duality, the persistence of stone, the fragility of memory. The walls of Göbekli Tepe still stand, but the reasons for their raising are gone. The terraces of Yonaguni still lie beneath the waves, but their origin remains uncertain. The myth of Atlantis endures, but whether it speaks of history or imagination remains unanswered. The map of time is not neat, it is fractured, and we wander between its fragments with questions heavier than answers. Perhaps the shattered map is itself a gift. It teaches us that history is not a closed book, but an unfinished puzzle. It warns us against certainty, against the arrogance of believing that our moment is the apex of understanding. It invites us to listen to the earth as we did in earlier ages, to attend to the whispers of drowned coasts, to consider that beneath every village, every city, every farm, there may lie layers of forgotten stories. And so, as night falls once again over the imagined hearth of an ancient village, as embers glow in the quiet, one might look out across the dark and wonder, beyond the fields, beyond the rivers, beyond the horizon itself, what lies buried in the silence of time? What peoples lived and vanished, leaving behind only myths we half remember? The map we carry is incomplete, its edges torn, its center uncertain. And in those fractures, in those absences, lies the haunting truth. We are not the first to walk upon this earth with dreams of permanence. We are only the latest to trace our lines upon a canvas already scarred by forgotten hands. Among the most enduring legends of human memory is the tale of a land that fell beneath the waves. Atlantis, its name alone evokes images of towers glittering with sunlight, harbors filled with ships, and temples devoted to gods whose names we no longer speak. It is a story told to us through Plato, who claimed to have heard it from Solon, who in turn had been told by priests of Egypt. It speaks of a mighty island empire beyond the pillars of Heracles, rich in power and knowledge, that defied the gods and was punished by the sea. Whether history or allegory, the story of Atlantis refuses to die, and perhaps the reason it persists is because it resonates with something deeper. The collective human memory of lands lost, of civilizations erased not by conquest, but by the ocean itself. Plato describes Atlantis in detail, its concentric rings of water and land, its palaces clad in orichalcum, its armies vast and disciplined. He insists it was real, a power that once threatened Athens itself, only to vanish in a single day and night of misfortune beneath the waves. Skeptics read this as philosophy, a moral fable about hubris and the fall of arrogant nations. Yet the precision of the tale, the richness of its imagery, and its curious echoes in cultures far from Greece raise questions that have never been fully silenced. Could Plato have been echoing not mere invention, but a distorted remembrance of a real cataclysm, preserved across generations? Flood myths are nearly universal. The Mesopotamians told of Utnapishtim, who survived a deluge sent by gods angered at humanity's noise. The Hebrews preserved the tale of Noah, guided by divine command to build an ark. In India, Manu was warned by a fish to prepare for rising waters. In Polynesia, chants tell of islands swallowed by the sea. In the Americas, indigenous traditions speak of floods that ended earlier ages of the world. These are not faint coincidences. They suggest that human beings across continents shared an ancient trauma, the memory of land lost suddenly to water. Atlantis, then, may be only the most famous crystallization of this theme, but not the only one. What if these myths are not inventions, but memories refracted through centuries of retelling? At the end of the last ice age, sea levels rose dramatically, over 100 meters in some places, as glaciers melted. Entire coastlines vanished. Plains where animals once roamed are now seafloors. If people had built settlements along those fertile coasts, as they surely must have, then their homes would have been drowned. To those who watched the sea encroach year by year, and at times perhaps catastrophically, it must have felt like the gods themselves were erasing the world. Such memories, passed down as story, might have reached Plato's ears as Atlantis. Even beyond the Mediterranean, drowned landscapes whisper their truths. Off the coast of Britain lies Doggerland, once a vast plain connecting the island to continental Europe. Rich in rivers and forests, it supported hunters and gatherers for thousands of years before it too was swallowed by the sea. Today, trawlers dredge up mammoth bones and tools from its depths. What stories did its last inhabitants tell as waters closed over their fields? Were there Atlantean echoes in their laments? And what of the Sundaland region of Southeast Asia, once a vast lowland, now beneath the sea? Could the myths of Lemuria or other lost continents be distant cultural memories of these submerged realms? The fascination with Atlantis is not only about geography or archaeology, it is about longing. Atlantis represents the possibility of a civilization both advanced and lost, a paradox that challenges our sense of progress. If such a place existed, then history is not a straight line from primitive to modern, but a cycle of rises and collapses. It suggests that we may not be the first to reach heights of culture and power, only the first to survive long enough to record them. That thought unsettles and enthralls, for it places us in a lineage of forgotten experiments. And yet, even as scholars debate, the myth of Atlantis refuses to vanish. It has been claimed in many places, in the Azores, in the Caribbean, beneath the ice of Antarctica, even in the Americas. Expeditions have scoured the seafloor. Sonar has mapped anomalies. Divers have traced strange patterns of stone. No proof has silenced the debate. Perhaps because the myth is not about one place, but about many. About all the lands the sea has claimed, about all the cities the world has erased. Atlantis is every drowned valley, every vanished coast, every silence in the archaeological record. It is the name we give to the abyss of history, the parts we cannot quite see. Still, one cannot dismiss the possibility that Plato's tale preserved something real. The precision of his descriptions, the echoes in Egyptian lore, the universality of flood myths. They suggest memory rather than invention. If so, then Atlantis is not only a cautionary allegory, but an inheritance of grief. A story humanity has told itself to remember that permanence is fragile, that the sea is never far from reclaiming what is built upon its shores. To stand on a modern coast and watch waves crash against rock is to feel something of this truth. The sea is tireless, patient, relentless. It builds no walls, writes no records, but it erases without hesitation. And yet, within its depths, lie ruins, waiting. Every diver who descends into sunken temples or streets feels the chill of recognition. Here people once lived, dreamed, built, prayed. Here the sea has taken, but not destroyed entirely. Memory survives in stone, even when voices are gone. Perhaps that is why Atlantis persists, not because it promises proof of a literal lost continent, but because it resonates with something deep within us. We too live by the sea. Our greatest cities, New York, Shanghai, London, Alexandria, cluster along coasts. We too are vulnerable to the rising tide, to storms and floods. Atlantis is not only behind us, it may be before us. In its myth, we see both our past and our possible future, a mirror of hubris and fragility. It warns us, reminds us, asks us to remember what the sea can take. And so, when night falls and waves whisper against the shore, when the horizon glimmers with moonlight, we hear the echo of Atlantis. It is the echo of every drowned land, every forgotten people, every silence left in the record of time. It is the echo of memory itself, rising from depths we cannot fully see, reminding us that history is not whole, and that even in its absence, the sea speaks. The legend of Atlantis is not meant to be resolved but lived with, a riddle that resists solution. For in its persistence lies its power. It tells us that history is fragile, that memory is water, and that beneath the calm surface of our present lies a storm of forgotten ages. We live not upon solid ground, but upon fragments, islands in a sea of time, and the waves are never still. If the ocean has hidden some of the world's past, then the land itself has left us riddles that stand in plain sight. From the deserts of Egypt to the high plains of Peru, from the stone circles of Britain to the stepped pyramids of Mesoamerica, immense monuments rise from earth and rock, enduring across millennia. We call them achievements of their respective cultures, and in many ways they are. Yet their scale, their precision, their inexplicable alignments with stars and solstices whisper of something more, that these were not isolated bursts of genius, but continuations of a legacy, fragments of a knowledge older than the civilizations that raised them. Consider the Great Pyramid of Giza. For thousands of years, it was the tallest man-made structure on Earth, built with an accuracy that still humbles modern engineers. Stones weighing tons were quarried, transported, and placed with joints so precise that not even a blade of grass can slip between them. The Mayan pyramid sides align almost perfectly with the cardinal points of the compass. Its dimensions seem to encode proportions of Earth itself, ratios of geometry and astronomy that suggest more than trial and error. Were the ancient Egyptians working with inherited knowledge, fragments of understanding passed down from a forgotten age? Or do we underestimate what determination, organization, and ingenuity can accomplish with simple tools? Both may be true, yet the question persists. Far from Egypt, at the high altitude of the Andes, lie the ruins of Sacsayhuaman, walls built with stones so massive that even with today's machinery, we would struggle to move them. These stones interlock with irregular precision, fitted without mortar, as if each piece had been shaped to nestle into the next like a puzzle. Earthquakes that toppled later structures left these walls standing. What was the origin of such knowledge? The Inca revered the site, but some of the work appears older than their empire, remnants of builders whose names are lost to time. In Tiwanaku, near Lake Titicaca, megaliths lie scattered, their sharp angles and drilled holes speaking of techniques beyond what the surviving culture recorded. Were these monuments independent inventions, or traces of a deeper architectural lineage? Stonehenge, rising from the Salisbury Plain, aligns with solstices, its massive lintels and trilithons standing in deliberate arrangement with the heavens. To us, it is a circle of silence, visited by tourists and scholars. But to those who raised it, it was surely a cosmic marker, a temple of the sky. The stones themselves came from distant quarries, carried across landscapes with determination that defies comprehension. Was Stonehenge merely a local ritual center, or part of a wider network of sky watchers who, across continents, raised monuments to bind Earth to stars? Across the ocean, the pyramids of Teotihuacan stretch across the Mexican plateau, their arrangement echoing constellations, their orientation suggesting astronomical purpose. In the Maya world, temples were built as living calendars, staircases marking days, shadows forming serpents at equinox. In Angkor, Cambodia, the Khmer built their city with alignments to the stars, their temples mapping constellations into stone. It is as though, across cultures, the same impulse arose: to bind the terrestrial to the celestial, to reflect the heavens upon the earth. Did each culture discover this independently, or did they draw upon fragments of a common inheritance, knowledge passed through stories and symbols long before writing fixed them in place? The possibility is haunting, that before what we call history, there may have been earlier chapters, civilizations rising and falling in rhythms we cannot yet see. Archaeology, bound by evidence, hesitates to claim more than it can prove. Yet the monuments themselves demand humility. They stand as anomalies, achievements so vast that they force us to wonder whether our timeline is truly complete. Perhaps humanity has always carried within it the capacity for genius, but perhaps too there have been rises and collapses, lost ages of experimentation, their survivors scattering, leaving behind whispers that later cultures heard and interpreted. Legends often support this suspicion. In Mesoamerica, myths tell of earlier ages, of worlds destroyed by flood, fire, or wind, of humans remade from maize after prior attempts failed. In Egypt, priests spoke of Zep-Tepi, the first time, when gods or ancestors laid the foundations of civilization before recorded dynasties. In India, cycles of yugas describe vast ages of rise and decline, civilizations born and destroyed in recurring cosmic rhythms. To the Polynesians, the sea itself was dotted with ancestral homelands now submerged. Again and again, myth insists that what we see as the beginning is not the first beginning, only the one that remains remembered. Skeptics point out that humans are ingenious, that stone, sweat, and patience can explain most wonders. And they are right. Human ingenuity is boundless. Yet the uncanny recurrence of astronomical precision, the persistence of megaliths too massive for convenience, the universality of cosmic alignment suggest a deeper thread. Even if there was no single global civilization, perhaps there was a shared inheritance, a way of seeing, a tradition of marrying earth and sky, passed from culture to culture, transformed but not extinguished. Civilizations before civilizations may not mean lost empires of steel and glass, but older lineages of knowledge, fragile yet resilient, carried across disasters, encoded in myth, enacted in stone. To stand before one of these monuments today is to feel both awe and disquiet. The stones are silent, yet they speak of hands long gone, of minds that saw beyond their horizon, of a continuity that stretches further back than our textbooks allow. Perhaps the builders never meant to leave puzzles for us. Perhaps they built only for themselves, for their gods, for their people. Yet by surviving, the stones have become riddles, reflections of a time when humanity's relationship with the cosmos was written in architecture. If there were civilizations before civilizations, they may never be fully recovered. The sea has taken many. The earth has buried more. Time has erased the names and voices. Yet their presence lingers in anomalies, in myths, in the persistent sense that history is not a straight line, but a palimpsest, overwritten again and again. And perhaps that is the deeper truth. Civilization is not a singular rise, but a series of risings, each leaving behind fragments for the next. As the sun sets behind a pyramid or a stone circle, casting shadows in patterns intended thousands of years ago, we feel ourselves pulled into that continuity. We, too, are builders, dreamers, stargazers. We, too, align our lives to cycles we barely understand. And like those before us, we may rise, we may fall, and we may leave behind fragments for others to wonder at. The monuments remind us that permanence is illusion, but legacy is possible. The question that lingers is not whether there were civilizations before civilizations, but whether we ourselves will be remembered as one, or forgotten, leaving only echoes in stone. Long before cities rose and empires claimed dominion, long before laws were written or histories carved into stone, humanity looked upward. The night sky was the first cathedral, its roof a canopy of stars, its altar the moon, its endless procession the slow march of constellations. Beneath that silence, people wondered, were those lights distant fires? Were they ancestors' souls, gods keeping watch, signs of destiny? The heavens, unchanging yet alive with movement, became the first mystery. And perhaps it was in those nights, with fire at the hearth and the Milky Way stretching across the black, that humanity first asked whether it was alone. The universality of skyward myth is striking. From the plains of Africa to the deserts of Arabia, from the Arctic tundra to the islands of Polynesia, every culture wove stories of beings from the sky. Some saw them as deities, radiant and commanding. Others imagined spirits, animals, or tricksters who came down to mingle with humankind. The Dogon of Mali told of beings from the star Sirius, long before modern astronomy confirmed Sirius as a binary system. The Hopi spoke of the Kachinas, spirit messengers who descended from the sky to teach and guide. The Sumerians etched onto clay tablets tales of Anunnaki, gods who descended from the heavens to shape human destinies. Were these merely the projections of human imagination, or faint recollections of encounters beyond our understanding? The night sky was also a teacher. Its cycles of moon and sun provided rhythm. Its constellations became markers for planting and harvest. In ancient Egypt, the rising of Sirius heralded the flooding of the Nile, lifeblood of the land. The Maya tracked Venus with obsessive precision, binding their wars and rituals to its movements. Polynesian navigators steered across vast oceans guided only by stars, their memories carrying maps written in constellations rather than ink. The sky was not distant, but intimate, not unreachable, but essential. Yet intimacy often blurs with reverence, and reverence sometimes slips into fear. The stars could guide, but they could also threaten, And when comets blazed across the firmament or eclipses darkened the sun, people trembled. For if the heavens could change, what else was possible? Amid these observations, there are anomalies, stories that suggest not only awe, but contact. Ancient cave paintings sometimes depict strange, elongated figures, their shapes unlike animals or men, their heads encircled by halos or helmets. In Val Camonica, Italy, prehistoric carvings show beings with radiating crowns and curious equipment. In Aboriginal lore, the Wangina are painted with large eyes and mouthless faces descending from the clouds. These images are interpreted as gods, spirits, or symbolic ancestors, but to some, they hint at something more, visitors remembered in the only language early humans possessed: myth and symbol. In Mesoamerica, the feathered serpent god, Quetzalcoatl, was said to have descended from the sky, teaching laws, agriculture, and arts before promising to return. In India's Vedic texts, Vimanas, flying chariots, roared through the heavens, wielding weapons of thunder. In Greece, tales of gods descending from Olympus to consort or battle with mortals filled epic poems. Were these merely metaphors for natural forces or dramatizations of celestial phenomena? Or were they cultural memories of encounters with something or someone whose origins lay beyond Earth? Skeptics remind us that the human mind is a maker of patterns. We see shapes in clouds, animals in constellations, gods in storms. To imagine visitors from the sky is to externalize our own wonder, to place agency in the heavens for what we cannot explain on Earth. And perhaps that is enough. But the persistence of these motifs across cultures raises questions. Why does humanity, separated by oceans and centuries, so often tell the same kind of stories? Descent from the sky, gifts of knowledge, departure with promises to return. The monuments themselves reinforce this mystery. The pyramids aligned to Orion, Stonehenge marking solstices, the Nazca lines in Peru, vast geoglyphs only fully visible from above. Were these merely products of ritual and astronomy, or gestures meant for watchers in the sky? Some scholars argue that to build such works was to mirror heaven upon earth, to ensure harmony between realms. But others wonder whether they were signals, messages carved into stone for those who might look down from above. Even cosmic disasters left their mark. When a comet flared across the sky, it could become a harbinger of doom in myth. When meteors streaked through the night, they were often interpreted as messages or weapons from the gods. The Tunguska explosion in 1908 flattened forests in Siberia, but imagine if such an event had struck in antiquity. Would survivors not have woven it into story as the wrath of beings above? Geological scars, impact craters now weathered by time, may once have been the origin of tales of heavenly fire. Catastrophe from the sky was not metaphor, but reality, shaping both landscapes and imagination. But perhaps the most haunting part of this fascination with the heavens is its persistence. We are no different today. We still look upward, pointing telescopes instead of naked eyes, launching probes into darkness instead of prayers into silence. We send golden records aboard spacecraft, inscribing music and mathematics for any who might listen. We scan radio waves for signals, hoping that somewhere in the vastness, another intelligence peers outward as we do. Our myths have become science, yet our longing remains the same: to know if we are alone. If ancient myths and monuments truly preserve faint memories of visitors, then humanity's story is entwined with a mystery far larger than itself. If they are instead only reflections of our own wonder, then they tell us something just as profound, that from the beginning we have sought connection, sought meaning beyond the horizon. In either case, the night sky has always been our mirror, reflecting both our fears and our aspirations. And so, as an ancient family sat by firelight, looking up at constellations just as we do today, perhaps they whispered stories of those who came from above, who taught, who vanished. Whether gods, spirits, or simply stars, the visitors of the night sky shaped humanity's imagination. They drew our eyes upward. They gave us calendars and myths. They taught us to dream of what lies beyond. The stars still burn with the same cold fire, indifferent to our questions. Yet we continue to weave them into stories, to wonder who else might see them, to imagine visitors descending, or ourselves ascending. In every flicker of myth, in every carved stone, in every telescope pointed skyward, the question persists. We are wanderers, not only of the earth, but of the heavens in our minds, and the night sky, vast and silent, remains the oldest riddle we have never solved. Beneath every myth of golden ages and divine visitors lies another truth, darker and more enduring. The world ends, again and again. The earth is not stable ground, but a restless sphere, its crust cracking, its waters rising and falling, its skies ablaze with fire when the heavens themselves intrude. For all of human history, we have lived on the edge of cataclysm. Sometimes the disasters were local, villages drowned in floods, valleys scorched by volcanic fire, cities reduced to rubble by earthquakes. But at other times, the planet itself convulsed on a scale that threatened the very survival of humanity. These resets were not metaphors, but lived experiences, carved into memory, fossilized in geology, whispered through myth. One of the greatest upheavals came as the Pleistocene yielded to the Holocene. The ice that had blanketed continents began to melt, releasing torrents of water that carved new rivers, raised oceans, and swallowed entire landscapes. Within a few thousand years, a blink in geological time, the face of the world was transformed. Coastal plains became seafloors, islands vanished, inland lakes expanded or drained. For people living then, the waters must have seemed alive, devouring the familiar, erasing sacred places, forcing migrations into lands unprepared to receive them. Flood myths are not merely symbolic. They are the echo of this watery apocalypse. The younger Dryas stands as a riddle within this transformation. Around 12,800 years ago, after the world had begun to warm, a sudden and dramatic cooling gripped the planet for more than a millennium. Ice re-advanced, species perished, climates shifted violently. Some scholars point to a massive release of freshwater disrupting ocean currents. Others argue for a comet or asteroid impact, scattering debris and igniting wildfires across continents. Whatever its cause, the younger Dryas was a cataclysm, a reset that forced human societies to adapt or die. Entire traditions of hunting collapsed with the disappearance of megafauna. Some groups found refuge in river valleys, turning reluctantly toward cultivation and storage, laying the groundwork for agriculture. Out of catastrophe emerged transformation, but the cost was immense. Volcanoes, too, left their mark as agents of sudden devastation. Mount Toba in Sumatra erupted around 74,000 years ago, with a force so vast it blanketed the skies with ash, plunging Earth into volcanic winter. Genetic studies suggest humanity may have been reduced to a bottleneck of only a few thousand survivors. If so, the world we know is the inheritance of those who endured that ash-choked darkness. Later eruptions, Thera in the Aegean, Krakatoa in Indonesia, Tambora in 1815, were smaller but still transformative, collapsing societies, altering climates, reshaping myths. The eruption of Thera, for instance, may lie at the heart of the Minoan collapse, and perhaps even the memory of Atlantis itself. To see mountains split open, to watch the sky blacken, To breathe air thick with ash must have felt like the wrath of gods, and in myth it became exactly that. Meteors added their violence from above. Earth bears the scars of ancient impacts. Chicxulub, which ended the reign of dinosaurs 65 million years ago, remains the most famous, but smaller strikes have occurred throughout human memory. A meteor exploding over Tunguska in 1908 flattened 2,000 square kilometers of forest. Imagine if such an event had struck a settlement in antiquity. Fire descending from the heavens, leveling forests and fields, would have entered myth as divine punishment. Perhaps some of the stories of fiery chariots and heavenly weapons reflect memories of such cosmic intrusions. Earthquakes, too, shattered certainty. Civilizations rose near fertile faults where rivers and valleys promised abundance, but tremors carried destruction. The collapse of cities in the Indus Valley may have been hastened by shifting rivers and tectonic instability. In the Mediterranean, quakes tore apart temples and harbors, swallowing coastlines. To live in a world where the ground itself could betray you was to live in constant awe of forces beyond comprehension. No wonder so many cultures saw the earth as alive, as something that could grow restless, demand sacrifice, or signal displeasure. Yet it was not only the scale of these disasters that mattered, it was their timing. They did not merely destroy, they reset. They erased chapters of memory, forcing survivors to rebuild upon the ruins, often forgetting what came before. A city razed by flood or fire might be rebuilt, but the trauma remained in myth, stripped of detail but swollen with meaning. Stories of angry gods, of vanished lands, of humanity punished and remade carry within them the outlines of real catastrophes. We tell them still because they are warnings encoded in story of what the earth and sky can do. The archaeology of cataclysm is written in gaps. Civilizations appear to rise suddenly, as if from nowhere. Others vanish without explanation, leaving only fragments. Was their disappearance due to conquest, famine, or natural disaster? Often the record is ambiguous. The Olmec of Mesoamerica, builders of colossal heads, seem to fade abruptly around 400 BCE. The Indus Valley cities, with their sophisticated plumbing and grid streets, declined into silence by 1500 BCE. The Mycenaeans collapsed in the Bronze Age, their palaces abandoned, their script forgotten. In each case, scholars debate causes, but climate shifts, earthquakes, and droughts linger as possible culprits. The pattern repeats: cataclysm, reset, loss of knowledge, reemergence in altered form. And so the question arises: how many times has humanity nearly been erased? How many civilizations might have risen in epochs beyond our grasp, their traces obliterated by flood, fire, and shifting earth? Conventional history insists that the first great civilizations began only 5,000 or 6,000 years ago, but anomalies suggest deeper timelines. If cataclysms have repeatedly reset humanity, perhaps our story is one of resilience punctuated by amnesia. We rise, we build, we are undone, and we begin again, each time carrying only fragments of what came before. In a sense, this cycle continues even now. Modern humanity, armed with technology and global networks, imagines itself immune to the resets of the past. Yet the Earth remains restless. Supervolcanoes slumber. Asteroids continue to pass near. Seas rise once again as ice melts. Storms grow fiercer with shifting climates. The echoes of Atlantis, the scars of Toba, the floods of the younger Dryas, they are not distant relics, but reminders. Cataclysm is not past tense, it is possibility. To sit by a fire in the present, as our ancestors once did, is to sense this continuity. The warmth shields us. But beyond its circle, the world remains immense, unpredictable. The mountains that watch in silence can erupt, the seas that cradle coasts can devour, the skies that inspire wonder can unleash fire. We are fragile, yet we endure. Every myth of destruction, every story of gods punishing and remaking the world is not only a record of the past, but a prophecy of cycles yet to come. Perhaps that is why humanity dreams so persistently of continuity beyond Earth, of colonies on Mars, of outposts among the stars. It is a dream born not only of ambition, but of memory, a recognition that this world, however beloved, has ended before and may end again. To imagine escape is to acknowledge the fragility of our tenure here. But whether or not we leave, the lesson of cataclysm remains. Survival is not permanence, progress is not guarantee, and every civilization, no matter how great, is written in sand. As dawn rises over a ruined plain, as survivors pick through ash or mud, as memory reshapes itself into story, humanity begins again. And in that act of beginning, we discover our resilience. The resets of Earth have not ended us. They have shaped us, tempered us, taught us humility. But they have also erased much, leaving us to wonder how many times before we stood where we stand now, thinking ourselves at the height of history, only to be reminded by the planet itself that we are part of a cycle far older than memory. When we think of history, we imagine a continuous line, events following one another in neat succession, cultures rising from older roots, the past flowing into the present like a river. But the truth is less certain, more fractured. The record of humanity is not a seamless story, but a series of fragments stitched together from bones, potsherds, ruins, and myths. Between those fragments lies silence, vast stretches of time for which we have no voices, no artifacts, no certainty. This silence is not absence alone. It is an active presence, a force that shapes what we know by withholding, by erasing, by resisting explanation. The archaeology of silence is as important as the archaeology of stone, for it reminds us that what we do not find may be as meaningful as what we do. Consider the expanse of time between the earliest known stone tools, over 2.5 million years old, and the flowering of recognizable civilizations only a few thousand years ago. For most of our existence, humanity lived without leaving monumental records. Fires were built, animals hunted, children born and buried, stories told, but almost nothing endures of those countless lives. Archaeologists unearth scattered tools, charred bones, the occasional grave, but little more. What did those people believe? How did they name the world? What dreams did they carry? The silence is overwhelming, and yet, from that silence arose everything we know today. Even within recorded history, silences abound. Whole civilizations appear briefly and vanish, leaving us to guess at their fate. The Indus Valley cities, Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, were marvels of planning, with straight streets, advanced drainage, and standardized weights. Yet they left almost no decipherable writing. We walk through their empty streets in excavation and hear nothing. No kings, no gods, no battles, no epics. They are mute, and their muteness is unnerving. Were they undone by climate change, by shifting rivers, by invasion, or by slow decline? The silence does not answer. In Mesoamerica, the Olmec carved colossal stone heads, their features unmistakably human, their size monumental. But who were they? We know little of their language, their beliefs, their fate. They appear as shadows in the archaeological record, ancestors to later cultures, yet themselves enigmatic. Their silence has become part of their identity, the people we cannot hear, who left monuments without words. Even where writing exists, it often fails us. Languages remain undeciphered. Linear A of Crete, the Rongorongo of Easter Island, the Quipu knots of the Andes whose full meaning may never be unlocked. Scripts stand before us like doors without keys, testimony to intelligence and expression we can see but not enter. Silence is not only absence, but barrier. There are also the silences of interruption, moments where evidence seems to vanish unnaturally. Layers of settlement in some regions show sudden breaks, abandonments without explanation, gaps that stretch for centuries before life returns. Were these caused by disease, famine, war, or disaster? The earth keeps its secret. In some places, we find artifacts out of context, tools buried where they should not be, structures older than their surroundings, hints of technologies not yet understood. Are these anomalies or glimpses of stories erased by silence? Silence can be deliberate too. Victors in war often destroy the records of the conquered, erasing names, burning libraries, chiseling out inscriptions. We know of whole peoples, like the Hittites, only because they were mentioned in the writings of their enemies. When their own archives are gone, their voice is mediated through others, filtered, distorted, or extinguished. Silence here is not natural, but imposed, an act of control over memory. The burning of the Library of Alexandria remains the most famous symbol of this violence against knowledge. Shelves upon shelves of scrolls, the wisdom of centuries reduced to ash. The silence it left is immeasurable. Yet silence is not only loss, it is also invitation. It compels us to imagine, to hypothesize, to fill the gaps with story. The myths of drowned lands, the legends of gods descending from the sky, the tales of golden ages, all may be attempts to articulate what silence withheld. We create narratives not only from evidence but from absence. Every blank in the record is a canvas upon which cultures paint meaning. Silence breeds myth, and myth, in turn, preserves fragments of memory the earth has otherwise swallowed. Some silences are geological. Entire landscapes have been lost beneath oceans or buried under sediment. Coastal settlements from the end of the Ice Age now lie deep underwater. Volcanic eruptions entombed cities like Pompeii, preserving some details while erasing others forever. Earthquakes shifted rivers, obliterating towns. The land itself is complicit in forgetting, reshaping itself, burying what once seemed eternal. The soil is not a library. It is a graveyard that sometimes allows fragments to surface. Even the presence of silence teaches us. When archaeologists uncover layers of settlement and suddenly encounter nothing, an empty stratum, a gap without habitation, it speaks of crisis. It tells of famine, migration, disease, or catastrophe. Silence is data. It is negative space that reveals by withholding. To study silence is to study disruption, the fragility of civilizations, the precariousness of survival. There is also the silence of the cosmos. For all our searching, the universe has yielded no clear sign of life beyond Earth. We call it the Fermi paradox. If intelligent life is common, why is the sky so quiet? Perhaps the silence of the stars mirrors the silences of our own history, gaps that conceal more than we can comprehend. The absence itself becomes a riddle. But silence is not absolute. It is punctured here and there by voices that survive. A painted handprint on a cave wall, a pot shard inscribed with a name, a temple foundation aligned with solstice light. These are whispers breaking through the vast hush of time. They are enough to remind us that silence is not emptiness, but erasure, and that what remains is both fragile and precious. To walk among ruins is to feel silence as a physical presence. The walls do not speak, yet they carry memory. The air itself seems heavy with what is missing. The conversations never heard, the rituals never seen, the lives unrecorded. Archaeology is as much about this weight as it is about artifacts. Each trowel that uncovers a broken vessel also uncovers the silence of what was not preserved. And in that silence, we sense both humility and awe. The archaeology of silence leaves us with questions rather than answers. How many civilizations rose and fell without leaving record? How much of humanity's story lies beneath the sea or buried under mountains of time? How many inventions, philosophies, and languages have been erased? The silence does not tell us, but in its refusal, it forces us to remember that our own voices, too, are fragile, and that permanence is an illusion. And yet, silence has its own kind of endurance. It holds space for mystery. It humbles us. It reminds us that what we know is always partial, always provisional. To study silence is to accept that history is not complete and never will be. But perhaps that is the point. Without silence, there would be no mystery, no awe, no drive to seek, no hunger to know. Silence shapes our story by remaining just beyond reach, a shadow that keeps us moving forward. As the fire of civilization burns, as libraries grow and cities rise, we must remember that silence is always waiting. Time erodes, disasters erase, power silences voices. What survives is not guaranteed, and so each generation must face the same truth. The map of history is incomplete and always will be. The archaeology of silence ensures that the past remains not a fixed narrative, but a living mystery, one that continues to haunt, to inspire, and to remind us of all we do not know. All journeys through the past lead finally to the threshold of the future. The stories of fire, land, villages, myths, monuments, floods, and silences have carried us here, to the recognition that we, too, are only a chapter, fragile and impermanent, within the book of earth. Our fires burn brighter, our cities rise higher, our networks span continents and skies. But when seen against the backdrop of deep time, when measured against the cycles of cataclysm and erasure, our moment is brief, a spark flickering in the vast dark. The question is not whether humanity will endure forever. It is what traces of us will remain, what echoes we will leave for the long tomorrow. Imagine our cities abandoned, skyscrapers collapsing into dust, bridges rusting into rivers, roads reclaimed by forests. Within centuries, nature would overtake the monuments of steel and glass. Within millennia, few traces would be visible on the surface. The bones of our age, plastics, alloys, radioisotopes, might endure longer, buried in sediments as strange markers of a geological stratum. Future beings, whether human descendants or something entirely other, might stumble upon these residues and wonder, who were these people who built so much, consumed so much, dreamed so much, and yet vanished? We think of ourselves as permanent, yet the earth has already taught us otherwise. The pyramids still stand, but they are anomalies. Most structures erode within centuries. The megaliths, the cave paintings, the stone tools, these are what endure. Perhaps, in the far future, all that will remain of us are fragments of stone and plastic, a scatter of satellites orbiting like artificial fossils, and the faint traces of carbon alteration in the atmosphere, recorded in ice or rock. Our entire epoch may be compressed into a thin layer of anomalies, an enigmatic signal in Earth's deep record. What will the archaeologists of tomorrow, if any exist, make of us? Will they see our age as an apex of intelligence, or as a cautionary tale of excess? Will they decipher our languages, our symbols, Our endless digital archives, or will these vanish in the great erasure of time, leaving only puzzles? Perhaps they will imagine us as we imagine Atlantis, a civilization both mighty and fragile, whose hubris led to its undoing. Perhaps they will tell myths of us, distorted by centuries of forgetting, speaking of an age when humans reached for the stars and then were swallowed by their own fires or drowned by their own seas. For the truth is, we now live within our own potential cataclysm. Rising seas, shifting climates, dwindling resources, all are reminders that permanence is illusion. We are not immune to the cycles that undid those before us. Our technology gives us power, but not immunity. The same networks that connect us make us vulnerable. The same machines that sustain us strain the earth. The long tomorrow is not guaranteed to be ours. It may belong to others, who will inherit what remains. And yet, there is hope in this recognition. To know we are impermanent is to know we are part of a larger continuity. We have inherited fire from the Paleolithic, myths from the Neolithic, fragments of civilizations drowned and forgotten. We carry within us the memory of all who came before, even if that memory is broken, distorted, incomplete. In the same way, those who come after may inherit fragments of us, not the full story, but echoes. Perhaps that is enough. Perhaps survival is not permanence, but continuity through fragments, through what endures against the silence. What do we wish to leave for the long tomorrow? Is it monuments of stone, messages etched into durable metal, records launched into space? Or is it less tangible? The stories, the ideas, the sense of wonder that might outlast even collapse. Our ancestors carved animals on cave walls not to be remembered by us, but to give meaning to themselves. And yet, their marks endure, reaching us across tens of thousands of years. In the same way, what we create now, our art, our science, our myths, may ripple further than we imagine. The long tomorrow may not remember our names, but it may remember our questions. The stars we have always gazed upon remind us of this continuity. Light from distant galaxies reaches us after millions of years, telling us that even across unimaginable spans, echoes can endure. We send our own signals outward, uncertain if they will ever be heard, but trusting that perhaps one day they will touch another intelligence. In this gesture, we align ourselves with every ancestor who looked upward and wondered. The long tomorrow is not only Earth's future, it is cosmic, stretching beyond our planet, beyond even our species. But even if humanity leaves Earth, even if we scatter among the stars, the truth remains. We are still bound to cycles of rise and fall, of memory and silence. Civilizations may spread across planets, but they will still be subject to time, entropy, and forgetting. The archaeology of silence will follow us into the cosmos, and the long tomorrow will still be filled with unanswered questions. This is not despair, but humility. The recognition that we are part of something larger than ourselves, larger than civilization, larger even than life. To stand at this threshold is to feel both small and immense. Small, because we are only one layer in the sediment of time, one voice among countless silences. Immense, because we can imagine the long tomorrow. We can think beyond our own span. We can ask what echoes will remain when we are gone. That capacity for imagination is itself a kind of permanence. Long after our buildings crumble, our myths may linger, reshaped and retold. Long after our technologies rust, our questions may still reverberate. The long tomorrow is built not only of what we leave behind, but of what we dare to ask now. Perhaps in that distant future, someone will find a fragment of us, a shard of plastic, a satellite tumbling in orbit, a story carried in oral tradition, and from it they will imagine us. They will wonder who we were, just as we wonder at those who carved stones and painted caves. They will see us not as we saw ourselves, but as echoes. And in that act of wondering, they will join us in the great continuity of memory and forgetting. The long tomorrow is not certainty, but possibility. It is the recognition that even as civilizations rise and fall, even as silence swallows most of the past, something always remains. Fire against the night, stones upon the land, villages by the river, myths of drowned empires, visitors in the sky, cataclysms and resets, silences that haunt, all of it flows into us and from us into those yet to come. We are both the inheritors of yesterday and the ancestors of tomorrow. And so, as the fire burns low, as dawn edges across the horizon of deep time, we stand in the fragile present with one certainty, that we are part of a story far older and far longer than ourselves. The long tomorrow awaits, carrying both our silences and our voices, our ruins and our questions, our fragility and our wonder. It will not remember everything, but it will remember enough.